We are Wavy Dynamics, a motorsport and automotive engineering consultancy, and this is our podcast, a place for engineering professionals, enthusiasts and fans to lock into conversations with motorsport's finest engineers. What do you want to learn about today? Be inspired. Okay, so I guess I need to say hello to the cameras. Yeah, okay. So I'm here with my first guest, which is Kyle Wilson-Clarke. He's a Le Mans winning race engineer. He's worked for Audi and Porsche in LMP and now works for Porsche in Formula E. So welcome to the Wavy Dynamics podcast, Kyle. Thank you for being our first guest.
Oh, thank you very much, Joe, for having me. I'm very honoured to be your first guest in this new exciting series, so thank you.
Thank you, cool. Okay, so I just wanted to get started by, familiarising our viewers with who you are, what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So, where are you from? Where did you grow up? How was school? That kind of thing.
Okay, yeah. So going back quite a way then.
Yeah.
So growing up for me was in the Middle East. I grew up in Dubai till I was around 10 years old. Dad was in the oil industry out there. So for me, very much an outdoors lifestyle, by the swimming pool a lot. And I think if I really come back all that way, that's kind of where I fell in love with cars and motorsport, because we were out in the sand dunes a lot with Jeeps, with quad bikes, following the Dubai International Rally. And actually then Mohammed bin Sulayem was one of the drivers with the Rothmans Porsches, which is what really kind of sticks in my mind when I'm really young, thinking about motorsport, cars, rallying. And we used to basically just follow the cars. A friend had the old Audi Quattro, and we'd all jump in that and we'd just be chasing down the rally cars down the sand dune. So that's kind of what I remember as a child. And that really sticks in my mind as kind of where I got the bug for cars and motorsport, I would say. Mm-hmm. So that goes back quite a way. We moved back soon after the Gulf War started. So moved back to Europe, also for education. I think it's okay when you're younger, but at the time, it's not the Dubai that people see on Instagram now. So it's a very different place. So we moved back to Europe, the UK and Europe then. Education then took over, based in southwest London, and I'm still lucky to be where I am now, still in southwest London. Even having worked for like you mentioned before, Audi and Porsche in Germany. So having worked in Germany a lot, I still managed to have my base and my family here based in London.
Okay.
So,
that's I see a parallel in that sense. So I was born in London. I moved to Brighton when I was about 11. And I had this friend, Grant. I don't know if he's going to watch this. But so his dad, it was when the E46 M3 first came out, and his dad had one. And when he was old enough to drive it, he'd get to take it out on weekends. And we always used to go to, like Goodwood. They used to have breakfast mornings and things like that. We used to go to those and just follow the supercars, like just charge after them. And it's a similar kind of thing in that sense.
That's what I'm doing now.
Yeah. So when you were at school, did you have you always loved cars, but were you really scientifically minded that early?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It was very much numbers, physics. Those were my fortes. History, I had no clue. I was getting the 1200s mixed up with the 1600s mixed up. I had no clue. I was terrible. Geography was quite physical as well, so I could always relate to that. Certainly the kind of rivers and all that kind of natural formation stuff, when it started to get into populations and this kind of thing, I didn't really interest me so much. It was more mechanics, certainly maths and physics that I really understood, and it was very natural for myself. I didn't really have to think hard about it. Once you explained the concept, I could understand what to do and how to apply it. If you're taught something that's very alien to yourself, someone can tell you 5 times, but if you just don't understand it, you try and memorize what to do, how to do it, and then it's always harder to click. But once I was explained physics or maths, kind of understood it, and then you could apply it in different ways, and it felt very, very natural. So probably I guess the same for yourself as an engineer. It's kind of the knack, as it were.
Similar, yeah, but funnily enough, I really didn't have a good relationship with maths
Okay.
until I got to uni, actually. And I think that was more to do with because how they used to teach us, it wasn't a case of they didn't give you any applications for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just stuff, and I was like, like I couldn't tie it to anything, you know.
Okay.
And it wasn't until got to university kind of times, and I started to realize, so that's what differentiation is for.
Yeah.
Like that's when I started to, I get more of an interest in it. It's still not my strongest, the strongest aspect of me as an engineer, I guess. But I see it's like the language of the universe. Like you can describe anything around you with maths. That's kind of like, that kind of draws me in a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what point did you find, or what point did you see engineering as, or even motorsport as your career, and start to make choices to kind of make that happen?
I would say motorsport certainly came later. It was definitely something in terms of engineering, either mechanical engineering or architecture, that also interested me.
Yeah.
In terms of design, it still interests me a little bit as well now. So I think whilst motorsport didn't happen till a little later on, whilst at university, I knew it was going to be mechanical engineering, because with the maths and physics, like I referenced earlier on, with that being so natural, it felt like a natural progression. And also, I feel like mechanical engineering generally is a good degree to have. You can end up in pretty much any role. You can go into finance if you want, because it gives you a good fundamental understanding in terms of problem solving. So for me, it wasn't just going into mechanical engineering and then being locked down there. It was still a gateway to many different things. And obviously, whilst I was at university, kind of discovered then really wanting to get into motorsport. I mean, it was more automotive originally, which then, we'll maybe touch on later on, that transpired then into motorsport, which for me was always a thing as well.
Okay, and what uni did you go to?
I went to UCL in London. Okay.
Okay.
I was there, did an undergrad, 4 years masters. I came out of that, and as with many people, I had bills to pay and was desperately trying to get a job. I was applying for the automotive manufacturers, the Jaguar Land Rovers, and it wasn't very successful, actually. And then I kind of thought, well, I just need to get a job. I got a job doing something that's nothing related to automotive engineering or anything. It was a sales role of some form. And after 3 months, I was like, what the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this? It's not what I want to be doing. How have I ended up here? So I discovered Cranfield University, and they do the postgrad MSc in Motorsport Engineering Management. And I went for an interview, and they said, well, why you? We've got hundreds, thousands of applications. There are 20 slots this year. Why you? I said, well, this is what I want to do. I'll work hard. I'll make it work. And they said, yeah, okay, fine. Conditionally, subject to you having some motorsport experience, which at the time I didn't have any. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So, and this is one thing I would recommend to anyone getting out or wanting to get into motorsport. It's all good and well saying, oh yeah, I'm good at maths, I'm good at this, I'm good at that. Go out, get some experience, go to the track, work with a local Formula 3 team, work with a local go-kart team, doesn't matter, anything. Understand and get the feeling of being trackside, if that's what you want to do trackside. If you want to be design and try and find someone that's doing some design work or has the capacity as a race team to do some design work. And the reason I say that is that I learned a lot just from, so as I may come back a little bit, the condition I had to get the position was to get some experience. So I basically had 6 months in which to get, for me, a minimum of 3 months experience working trackside. And I found a team based down in Dunsfold, so where Top Gear is filmed actually. There's a private historic race team there. They're running old Lolas, they're running Mustangs, all sorts of classic cars basically. And I went along and I said, look, I'll work for free. I'll get some experience with you guys. This is my target after 3 months, just to have had some experience. And for me, that was a very fundamental part of understanding what I'd need to be doing. And it's all good and well studying, but if you can't relate how it's going to be applied, it becomes quite abstract. So I think it helps having seen where you need to be long term, or what you're trying to apply it to, even before you start to study, if that makes sense. It makes it easier to relate to how to apply everything as well.
Yeah.
So,
and was Trackside, obviously there's many different roles in motorsport, was Trackside always your target?
I would say, yeah, I was definitely drawn to being more trackside than design. I mean, design still interests me. But I think generally as a race engineer, I was always a target, a race engineer, because you get involved with a big variety of tasks. You are not really a specialist. And this is something I kind of thought to myself, that I don't really want to be an absolute specialist, the finest detail of one item. I want to have a good, broad understanding. And a lot of it is situational in terms of how you end up where you end up as well. And if I just told myself, right, I'm only going to be a race engineer when I first started, would I have actually been here? I don't know. It's because you try and leave the door open, you're open to ideas, and I was fortunate enough that I made the right decisions at the right times, but also the right opportunities came up as well. And you're obviously in control of your own destiny in some respect, but sometimes the door has to open for you. And that's what I realized as well, that a lot of the reason why I'm here is because I met the right people along the right time, and I owe a lot to those people as I made my way through my career as well. So
okay, so we'll get onto that a bit more, but just like, how did you find uni at Cranfield? How was that experience?
Cranfield itself I found very good in terms of the educational side. I would say I learned a little bit, or say I learned a bit more, but more of it was being exposed to the right people. And I think it opened a lot of doors, but just because of the name of it, people seem to see you in a different manner. And actually a lot of the names or the guys that I studied with, or years ahead or behind myself, they're all over the place. And you always bump into these guys that even that came to Porsche afterwards, that was involved with a supplier I've worked with, have gone to different Formula One teams. So obviously it's got a reputation for itself, and it's hard to say how much of it really comes from the education itself. For sure, I learned a lot, but in 1 year, you learn a lot more on the job. I'll tell you that much now. So I think it's more about the connections it gave and the opportunities it gave for myself, and also it started to push me into an area of getting more track experience, because during the course itself, you had a group project, which was a project you did obviously in a group. There were, I don't know, five of us in a group, and you're working, trying to manage a project together. But then you've also got your individual project, which is your thesis. And you can't just sit down behind a desk and make up a project. It had to be something in industry, either with a team, with a supplier, with a design company. And it had to be relevant. So I ended up working with a race team and working on data acquisition systems with them, trying to bring their systems forward, but also ways of trying to quantify driver performance. And whilst I don't use it now, it was just trying to find a way of applying the things I'd learnt into the real world. And whilst you might not actually say it wasn't that relevant in hindsight, it encourages you to push that next level and try and dig it a bit more.
A little teaser.
Exactly.
And so how were you linked as a student at Cranfield to those companies? Like, was it like the kind of academic relationships that were going on there? So, there'd be a pool of companies, and they'll just throw ideas at Cranfield for thesis things, and like, we need some help with this. Have you got any students? Or was it that kind of thing?
So, yes, there were some. So the Cranfield itself had an affiliation with many Formula One teams. For example, Williams. Williams are actually sponsoring some of the students. So if you met certain criteria in terms of your education level or whatever it was, they were even contributing towards it. And part of that was to give a project. Alternatively, yes, there were some projects that were suggested by manufacturers, Formula One teams, chassis designers, and so on. But equally, it was up to yourself as well. In my case, I went out and found a team and said, look, I started working for them, and then saw a bit of a gap in terms of what they were doing. I thought, okay, we could, this is something that I feel you guys are missing. This is something I can bring to the team.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to do this as my project, and that's how it transpired. So it was really free. You could have a look at the list and say, oh yeah, that really suits me. I'd really like to do that. And that was supplied by a manufacturer or someone that has an association with Cranfield, because there are quite a few big teams or companies that do that. Alternative is up to yourself, and that's how I ended up doing it, is finding something for myself that I found interesting and I thought brought something to the team I was working with at the time.
Okay, cool. So you graduate Cranfield, then what was after that?
So whilst I was at Cranfield, I was working with the GT team, and there was a race engineer there. And he said to me, look, I like what you're doing. I've done a few races with the GT team. I like what you're doing. You should come to Le Mans. I'm also working on an LMP2 car.
Oh, wow.
And this was around 2004. I have to think now which year it was. I think it's around 2004. And I'd been going to Le Mans with some friends since 1999, and we'd go out. Yeah. It started out as 3 cars, 6 of us. Then the next year it was 10 cars. Then it was 14 cars. And we were going out to Le Mans just as spectators. And all my friends are car nuts. Yeah. Whether it's, and that's not related to industry. That's just in my personal life. We all love cars, and we do track days. We, if we can, do trips to Europe, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So trip to Europe was Le Mans. And then, he mentioned that to me. I was like, wow, okay, this would be cool.
Yeah, you don't have to ask me twice
for
that.
No, exactly. So I ended up doing a test with those guys, and I think it was at Snetterton at the time. They were doing a rollout for the LMP2 car. Okay. So I went along, and they said, yeah, okay, let's see what you can do, type thing. Mm-hmm. And they had some support from data acquisition companies, but they didn't have a dedicated data engineer or I'd say assistant engineer or junior engineer at the time. There was just a race engineer, and then there was the data support from the supplier. So there was kind of this bridge that needed to be gapped between the two, and I think that's kind of where I fell in. Okay. So at the beginning I said, look, I'm happy to come. I'll do Le Mans with you guys. Let's see how it goes. And then after Le Mans they said, look, we're doing... trying to think what championship it was called at the time now. It was even before the ILMC. It was like the ELMS, I think it was. Yes, it was ELMS, European Le Mans series. So we were doing races in Europe, and they said, look, do you want to come along, finish the rest of the season with us? I was like, yeah, perfect, let's do it. At the time, it was for myself just as experience, and I wasn't getting paid for it. But it came to the end of the season, they said to me, look, you guys have done a good job. I want to back pay you for everything you've done.
Oh, wow.
So I was very fortunate that helped me, and after that they offered me a position full-time with them for the subsequent year. And that's when they were moving up from LMP2 to LMP1. And this is a small private team. Mm-hmm. But regardless, we were involved with Lola at the time. And I was very lucky that it was one of the first LMP1s that Lola were sending out to customers, and the design engineer was with us at the track at all the races, and I guess that's a deal the team boss had put together. Mm. So I was again surrounded by someone else to draw experience from, which was great. Yeah. So, wow. He was the brains, and I was the hands, as it were, in some ways, and I was just soaking up as much as I could, whether it was trying to design very simple simulations in terms of race strategy and driver management, and looking forward for the race. How are we going to manage the race? How are we going to? This is talking about 24-hour racing. So how the drivers are going to get their rest and all this kind of thing. So it kind of, like I say, it's right place, right time. And if it hadn't been for that project at Cranfield, I wouldn't have met the race engineer. If I hadn't met the race engineer, then the next door wouldn't have opened up, and then it just kind of slowly progressed bit by bit. And I expect that will strike a chord with many people in the industry, and you bump into a lot of people along the way. That's one thing for anyone getting into motorsport. Don't burn any bridges.
Yeah, it's a small world.
Very small world.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I still bump into people that I've worked with many years ago, and always, at the moment, for me, good memories. And you meet fantastic people, and you bump into people at the lounge, in the airport lounges, like traveling from one place to the next. They're going this way, you're going that way, and that's always good as well. So yeah.
Nice. Okay. So you had that experience. Then when was your first time you were, now I'm a race engineer, now I've got people under me. What was your first experience of that?
So it was around the same time. I'm trying to think now the sequence of how things happened. I actually was introduced to a championship called Super League, and this was being the team. So the team I was basically asked to join as a race engineer was Alan Docking, and it was then at the time Delta Motorsports. Delta Motorsports were supplying the engineering capacity to Docking, who Docking was supplying more the hands-on mechanics side of things. So I was asked to join them, and again, fantastic guys again I met along the way. This had actually come from, just thinking back now, some guys I'd met after the LMP time. There was a championship that started up called GP Masters. And for those guys that probably haven't been around or didn't see it, it was a championship, unfortunately didn't last too long. But it was a championship where we had all the old F1 drivers.
Yeah,
so it was Mansell, Patrese, De Cesare. I mean, the list goes on. Yeah, loads of fantastic guys, and I was involved with Delta Motorsports, who at the time were building these cars for the championship, and I was basically data engineer, electronics, whatever for the championship. So I then was basically trying to put systems in place to manage, look after, program all of the cars. Trying to think how now I've come back that far, but what was the original question now?
Your first time, your first experience when you were actually fully responsible for the race as an engineer. Yeah,
so then that's how then it's ended up at Super League. So knowing all these people, that then led me to Super League, and that was when I kind of first time as a real race engineer in front of a car. And I think the first year was running Antonio Pizzonia, and that was great. First time out, I think we got actually on pole the first time out, and I think we ended up P3 at the end of the race. But again, fantastic memories starting out early. That was one of the first times really as a race engineer. Very much smaller than you see LMP now, or back in the day when I was doing it. You had two mechanics, one tyre guy, and myself, and I was doing second tyre pressures myself. I was really much hands-on, and that was great. Again, working in a small team, hands-on, closer interaction with the driver. No data engineer. I was doing that myself, or the guys were doing it themselves. So race engineers were doing it themselves, and that was great. So I learned a lot there as well. Really much hands-on, small championship, and that was around the same sort of time that I was being introduced into Audi, and that was Audi LMP.
Okay.
And that's around the end of 2009, around 2010. I think it's around that sort of time. I was introduced to them, and they were looking for a data engineer, support race engineer, just someone to come on up. So, yeah, it was around that time where I'd kind of struggled in motorsport for a little bit for those guys contracting, and there was no security for myself. I found myself into a position doing some work with A1GP, and that was towards the tail end of the championship, when the championship was starting to lose a bit of momentum, when the Ferraris had just come in, and I didn't get involved with a great team, unfortunately, and promise of money kept coming in, and it didn't, and then it was 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, and then I realised to myself, you know what, it's not coming. I need to look for something else quickly.
Yeah.
And actually, just before the Audi thing, I started to at the time there was nothing else in motorsport, and I kind of lost faith a little bit. I got quite burned in terms of financially, in terms of being able to have something consistent. I needed to have, you need to pay your bills.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up getting involved with home automation, actually. So this is a bit of a wraparound story, but this is involved with very, very high-end houses where the whole house is controlled by one system, or it's big yachts that are controlled by one system, or even hotels. And he was basically programming those. So I thought it was in some ways quite similar to how you program a race car. You've got a load of inputs, sensors,
Mm-hmm.
you have a load of conditions, and then you can be as fancy as you want. And you're setting up schedules, you're setting up things based upon sunlight, you're doing watering systems, swimming pool control, fireplace control, cinema room, audio, and we're doing massive houses. These guys are spending kind of $750,000 just on the equipment for their house. So it was big projects we were working on. These are private individuals.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, this is cool. I can move into this if motorsport fails. And that's when the phone rang for Audi. So I was just at the point where I was looking to buy into a company to kind of maybe go a different direction out of motorsport. And then the phone rang. I was like, well, you know what?
Got to be a sign.
I need to give this another go.
Mm.
And it was with Audi.
Yeah.
And that was with a company called Progressive Motorsport, which you may have heard the name.
Yeah, because I actually spoke to Howden.
Okay, yeah.
Similarly for another article.
Yes.
So, I got to hear a bit of the history about that. I think it was before I spoke to you, actually.
Okay.
But yeah, so...
So I owe a lot to these guys. It was very early. It was basically the three of us to begin with. It was Howden. So Howden, H. Haynes, as everyone knows him as H.
Yeah.
And then Dave Ward as well. So those two set up a company called Progressive Motorsport. And it was myself really involved at a very early stage. And even before they got their workshop, we were working out of H's garage and slowly moved up from there. So yeah.
Yeah, because he kind of was explaining to me, and I think if I understood him right, that he was doing some work for Yoast in some way.
That's right.
And then they basically asked him to set up a team.
That's right.
So that's kind of how that came. But at that early stage, he was working from his garage.
So yeah, basically working from home. I mean, he had no need for a facility because he was basically a contracting race engineer.
Yeah, I guess so.
So there was no need for it. Obviously, then when you start to expand, and exactly as you mentioned there, then Yoast basically wanted a UK or arm of engineers that they could call on as and when they needed. So he was asked to set that up.
That sounds like a dream.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they were struggling, I guess, to find engineers where they're based in Wold-Mikkelbach, which is in the middle of nowhere. Lovely place. Mm-hmm. But I think if you're looking for quality engineers, asking someone to move there would be a long shot. So I think that's how this whole thing started up. And as a result, then I was asked to join. And it was starting out with just a couple of engineers, and that expanded, and all these guys are still around now. And they're in different places, and I think H is still doing, obviously, stuff related to motorsport, but not in the same areas as he was at the time. Mm-hmm. And it started to move from there. So it started to work with Yoast, and that was in around 10, 11, as I mentioned. In 10. Mm-hmm. And then, I was joined as a data engineer. After a couple of races, they said, all right, okay, cool. Now you can be performance or assistant race engineer, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. And just so, for everyone watching, how would you exactly describe that role, the performance/race?
Okay. So, I mean, data engineer for me, if I come back a stage, is really looking after the data systems. So someone that's plugging into the car, connecting to the car and programming, downloading data, looking after sensors, really the nuts and bolts of producing good quality data. Yeah. So a data engineer's responsibility is making sure the data we're generating is accurate, because there's no point analyzing data that's not accurate. Yeah. This is going a bit more into depth as opposed to just, making sure the sensors you have are within range. Damper displacements are not bottoming out because then they're useless. Your lasers are working, they're cleaned, making sure they're calibrated correctly, because if you believe you're in one position of ride height and you're somewhere completely different, then you can't rely on where you are in terms of the aero map and aero balance, and then it'd be very hard to decipher what the driver's telling you in terms of feedback, you need to have a good, clear understanding of where you are. So there's very basic examples.
Yep. Making
sure your wheel speed sensors are working. So really doing a lot of checks before the car leaves. And then also when the car comes back, analysing the data to make sure it's good quality. So that's for me what a data engineer is doing. In a smaller team, you may not have the kind of middle ground performance engineer between the race engineer and the data engineer. So then they'd be required to analyse performance-related data as well. It depends on how big the team is and how many people there are. So if we split it up into 3 roles, the performance engineer or assistant race engineer, whatever you want to call it, would then be analysing the data that the race engineer is requesting. So where are we in the aero map? What balance do we have? How can we change it? Is it optimum in terms of drag versus downforce? Is it? Are we hitting the bump rubbers in a place that's upsetting the driver? I mean, many examples I could try and think of, but the role then of the performance engineer is to make sure we're extracting as much out of the performance from the car itself.
And that can include simulations, running lap sims and that kind of thing.
Definitely. If your team is small, then certainly the performance engineer would be running simulations on setup. So they'll be running simulations to understand, I don't know, if you change your spring stiffness, what's the effect of ride height? What's the effect of aero balance? What's the effect of efficiency, aero efficiency? What's the mechanical balance change? So I mean, you can just be a simulation can be as simple as what's the change in mechanical balance when you change from roll bar X to Y. It can be far more complex to say, okay, what's the different? What's the gain in lap time? So I mean, simulation. Everyone always associates simulation as a lap simulation. Yeah. It can be a straight line simulation. It can be a cornering simulation. It can be, it depends how complex you want to look at it.
Yeah.
So certainly a performance engineer would be doing more of those kind of things, supporting the race engineer, because generally the race engineer would then be discussing, it depends how big the team is, but if you're looking at an LMP style bigger team, you'd have actually simulation done by a simulation department instead. And they'd be feeding results into the performance engineer be filtering those out, feeding results into the race engineer. And the race engineer would be collecting those results along with the aero engineers, along with the tyre engineers, along with strategy, and then you'll be managing mechanics on top. So then that's now starting to grow, and that's similar to what you'd find in an F1 team as well. Yeah. Obviously, if you're looking at a small Formula 3 team, you might have someone doing simulations then for the whole team. Say smaller Formula 3 teams, but you still have this similar sort of structure, race engineer, performance data engineer, just how big a scale you're looking at as well.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So, moving on to the Audi stage. So
yes.
You turn up. I guess it must have been a test. Was your first track experience with them?
Yes, it was. I'm trying to think where it was. It might have been Monte Blanco, somewhere in the middle of November or December. Yeah. I was blown away by the number of cars that we had. We had performance cars, endurance car, a reference car.
Oh, really?
And then we had, when we were testing, it was big.
What's the 8 chassis, 10?
No, you'd have maybe 4 cars running. Okay. 3 cars, certainly. Maybe not all the time, but if you had an endurance car running for parts, to prove parts for the endurance race, as well as performance testing, so setup work, tyre work, you'd then have a second car for that. You might have a reference car as well, which would have been a car that didn't change at all, and that would just be run at various times throughout the day to check how the track conditions were improving or changing, or is the wind really affecting lap times, because then you're running your performance car and you don't know, are we actually getting faster or not? So that's what the reference car was for.
Wow. Okay.
So obviously it was a bit of an army having all of that to be run, and that was eye-opening from what I'd come from, but it was great to see that.
Yeah, it's like I find how can I say it? Like just the idea of, right, we're trying to do this, like this is our objective.
Yeah.
What is the best way to do it? Like money no object, resources no object. Let's just, have
solve the problem.
Yeah, let's just solve the problem however we need to solve it. I really like that that approach to things. I guess what I was saying earlier, my experience at Ford and things like that, it's like we want it to be very low budget. We can't take any risks because we're making 1 million of them, and we don't want all these warranty claims and that kind of thing. But yeah, developing a car for a specific purpose and just throwing everything you need to do, like I really like that. That's really exciting for me.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wasn't involved with the project management stage at that time. I was very, very fresh into it all, so I was very much more hands-on, running a car, this kind of thing. But kind of you now, with the experience I have, you start to understand the mammoth that's behind it. And it was huge. If you think about producing an engine, the hybrid systems, the lead times of all of these things, how condensed it was. I remember having issues in endurance tests months before Le Mans, and then having weeks then to solve the issue, running another endurance test to get the parts proven, because it's not acceptable, to the big manufacturers that you haven't proven, you have not done even a successful endurance test before going to the race. How is that possible? You have to have been successful. So that was it, to run these endurance tests very early on, which started even in November, December time in Aragon. For those guys that have done it before, it's freezing cold, and you're running the cars to prove the parts are going to hold up, and you try and give them as much as you can. And there you're doing simulations again in terms of other safety car simulations to make sure that the car still maintains into a window. Everything's working across big temperature ranges. And drivers are able to extract the most out of it as well.
It's a big old program, eh?
Definitely. But it was, certainly the heydays you mentioned earlier on of my career so far. It was, a good day to be involved. Yeah,
no doubt. I'd always imagine like moments like that. It's like you're saying, at the first testing, you look around. There's like however many Audis, operating around the track, and so much work going on. I'd always imagine there's a moment where you kind of just take a second and you're like, wow, like I'm here.
Definitely.
That must have been wicked.
Definitely. Yeah, I hadn't seen that many engineers at a track, desks all laid out, all the screens, and that was the first time I was like, okay, wow, this is big. This is really big. And you see the 4 trucks out the back, and then you've got the Michelin trucks, and they've got stacks of tyres because we were tyre testing at the time as well. And that was really cool. That was a big moment, as you mentioned.
And on that subject of tyres, so like it's an area that I've been researching quite a lot, because I find it interesting, but I'm also I realise the importance of it in motorsport today, and understanding and managing tyres. And I've partnered with a company called Mega Ride. I don't know if you heard of them, but they make they're kind of commercializing thermomechanical tyre models.
Okay.
So making them available to not just the teams who have resources to make their own, but the wider motorsport field. So it's just understanding the complexity of tyres, and working to you've got the temperature at which they're operating is a key thing, but not only that, the kind of the curing, the vulcanization process is continuing as they're hot. So a hot tire after 2 hours of being hot is different to a hot tire which is freshly hot. So like what was your like how much depth as a race engineer do you get to get into that kind of thing?
I would say in my relatively small experience, we've put a lot more effort now in Formula E than we were in LMP times.
Yeah.
Because of how the championship works and how critical tyres is in Formula E. It's not a surprise to those guys in the championship.
Yeah.
But Formula E is almost now a tyre management category and no longer an energy management category, which sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
But to perform well in Formula E, you have to be qualifying up front. And in order to qualify up front, you have to nail it with the tyres. And that really is critical. I mean, you can look at a click of roll bar and a bit of ride height or whatever, but if you look at the difference in lap times between some of the cars, it's just down to tyres for me.
Yeah.
Optimizing the tyres, making sure you understand exactly where you need to be with those, which is actually much harder than anyone would imagine. You think you understand it, and then you don't understand it, and then you think you've now, we finally have understood it, then you realise you haven't.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because you see some teams, one race they're doing really well, the next they're not. And is it because the track surface is suiting them better than the other guys?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're running the same tyres.
Yeah.
So it's not that straightforward. And with what you're mentioning there, I can completely sympathise with in terms of developing your own tyre models. It's something we're certainly doing, and something we do in far higher level of detail now compared to what we did with LMP. Because in LMP, you would heat your tyres and you'd run them over a much smaller temperature window. And as a result, it wasn't that critical to get it to work over a large range. In Formula E now, you're not allowed to heat tyres. So you'll be running tyres from cold. And that's how you'll want to run them for qualifying, with a certain temperature target or with a certain pressure target. But then if you continue to run, because they're an all-weather tyre, they start to get steaming hot. And we've just come back from Jakarta. And the difference in tyre temperature from a quali lap, where they were starting, I don't know, ambient temperature at 30-something degrees, it was warm there.
Yeah.
And track temperatures were up to 45 degrees. So the tyre surface or the tyre temperature itself is getting to north of 100.
Yeah.
The balance is completely different.
Yeah.
The degradation is obviously something to have to account for. So I think we're putting far more emphasis now in terms of tyre management and understanding how the tyres are working more now than we were in LMP times.
Yeah. And are you, obviously you have the kind of simulation models, but are you physically measuring the properties of the tyre at the track? Like, do you guys have equipment to do that?
I can't say too much, but we certainly look at how much the tyres are wearing, to have an understanding of where your camber is.
Yeah.
You're restricted in terms of your minimum, maximum cambers from Michelin, and again, your tyre pressures. So obviously you have to stay within these boundaries. And yeah, it's up to you to make sure, one, the tyre's there for qualifying, but also it's going to last the race. And you can have obviously very high thermal degradation, but also mechanical degradation as well as the race is going on. And that is not the same front to rear. So your balance is changing and is expected to change throughout the race. And it's up to you to make sure you account for that. So whether you're doing that based upon simulations, having a very good tyre model, whether you're doing it in the simulator, again, needs a very good tyre model. Or if you're doing it based on experience from previous races. But then it's, if you're going to a new track, for us, Jakarta this last weekend, we'd not raced there before. We didn't see what the track surface was going to be like. We didn't know exactly how it was going to behave. And whilst you can measure the macro and micro, it doesn't mean it necessarily sits exactly the same as other tracks, because at that track specifically, there was a lot of combined lateral load. And the tyres suffer and they struggle with that. With relatively high torque with the electric powertrain, trying to get that power down when you're accelerating out of long laterally loaded corners, it makes a tough time for the tyre.
Yeah. So I guess in that respect, is there, are you prompting the driver to, maybe after you've done some practice and you get a good understanding of how the tyres are being worked, and how the balance is changing, is there then some guidance you give to the driver to get them to adjust their driving styles?
I think certainly you need to look at how you're going to make the tyre last.
Yeah.
But obviously you don't want to undershoot as well, because if you're trying to do too much management of the tyre and then you haven't used its full potential. I think more of what you're referencing would be related to Formula 1, where there's, we do have obviously a drop-off with the tyre, but I think they'd experience that far more than we do. And additionally, they've got different compounds they have to run.
Yeah.
So we don't have that. So we know all teams are on the same tyre at the same time. So that levels a playing field in some respects. So we don't change tyres. During the race, you've got the same tyres from start to end. Everyone's got the same tyre. Formula 1, obviously, you're different. So you have to run your different compounds. You can change them whenever you want. You can start in any different way. So at various times of the race, you have different drivers pushing at different levels, going for an undercut, overcut, this kind of thing as well. So I think what I imagine you're referencing there is more Formula 1 related compared to what we're doing.
Okay. And I guess going back to Audi, where you're saying tyres weren't so important, but also the technology, I guess, wasn't as advanced in how you can understand tyres. What work were you doing with them in that sense? Like, you said, was it a very narrow window, or the window didn't matter so much with those tyres?
I think it's just a very different scenario. So Formula E has an all-weather tyre.
Mm-hmm.
This has to work across a range of conditions, and we pray it doesn't rain, because the tread depth is so narrow that if it rains heavily, you'll be ice skating, basically. So put that aside. Now, if you come back to the LMP, you basically had your seasons. So the start of the season, often either Silverstone or Spa leading up to Le Mans, you had your cooler temperature range. Mm-hmm. And then after Le Mans was a higher temperature range. So whether it was Shanghai, Fuji aside for a minute, but Bahrain, Austin, those kind of places. So you'd kind of split the season up into two parts.
Okay.
And because of that, you'd be looking at your cooler compounds, constructions compounds, to go for the start of the season up to Le Mans. And then you'd look at your warmer climates, warmer track temperatures, so your hotter tyres, so medium compounds, or depends how you want to call them, or medium or hard compounds. We didn't call it that, but towards the end of the season.
Okay.
So it was very critical. So we were able to choose a construction, so the physical underlying layers construction of the tyre, as well as the compounds. And we would be constantly matching those front to rear to make sure you had a good balance across a variety of temperature windows. So there was a lot of tyre testing that was done. And as well as making sure that they were good performing for one lap, you had to make sure they lasted the duration. And for us at Le Mans, it was even triple or even quadruple stints we were even doing at one point with our tyres there. And so a lot of it was testing in as relevant conditions as possible. For example, Paul Ricard, which you could argue is not the best, but there isn't anything that really represents Le Mans in that respect because of the long straights. Mm-hmm. You always found that a tyre that worked at at cooler temperatures would only work at warmer temperatures in Le Mans because it doesn't have the same. The tyre energies are different, basically. So we were definitely testing different types of tyres. So it was real, soft, cold temperature tyres, medium temp, and trying to find that range. So,
okay,
yeah.
So then, if you through your testing you're finding out that the car's not quite working the tyre, maybe there's not putting enough energy into it, or it's putting too much. How are you then using that to feed into your setup? So what are you changing for the car in those situations?
So when we were tyre testing, we would not change that up. So we would have a reference tyre, whether it was the previous season's tyre or the current season's reference of some kind, and we'd always use those. So you'd do a tyre test block, for example, and you'd either do a construction block or a compound test block. Mm-hmm. So say, for example, we're doing compounds. We'd have a reference tyre, you do a reference, then you'd have test 1, test 2, then back to a reference. Mm-hmm. Then maybe test 3, test 4, then back to a reference again. So you'd always have clear bookmarks, however you want to call it, to say, okay, here's your reference. Mm-hmm. And for the driver, they'd generally be blind. So you could start it as test A, then reference A, B, or B, C, and then another reference. Mm-hmm. And it's not to test the driver to try and catch him out. It's to try and make sure he's not being influenced with what he believes he should feel.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, for one of me, two fantastic guys for tyre testing with Tom Christensen and Timo Bernhard, you could change just the rear construction a small amount to try and get a bit of extra stability, and they'll tell you straight away, okay, yeah, I can get onto the power a bit earlier. It's giving me a bit more lateral load. On braking, I can trail in a bit harder. I can brake a bit deeper. And these guys would feel these very, very small differences. And so that's what we were doing when we were specifically tyre testing. And along those lines, obviously, you're then checking other things to say how is it in terms of warm-up. So you'd generally run them from cold. How was the warm-up, especially if you're racing in America, because there was no tyre heating when we were running. Okay. So your tyres need to run from cold. So maybe a tyre that worked well in European races where you could do tyre heating would be different to what you did in America. Mm-hmm. Bearing in mind you could still get a full course yellow or a safety car which your tyres cooled off, but that occurrence is maybe happening once a stint, whereas in America it was happening every stint guaranteed. If you're going out with new cold tyres, you have to make sure you can get the tyre warm up quick. It's no point of being super fast by 1 or 2 tenths when they were warm, but you're losing 3 seconds a lap at the beginning when they were cold. So it's about working out the overall performance over a stint.
Okay. So if the tyres weren't warming up as you expected, what would you be looking to change?
It's about I think if you're specifically tyre testing, you'd be looking at different compounds to suit and constructions to suit the conditions you're working with. So you'd try and make sure that you would have a good spread between your cold, medium and high temperature windows, track temperature window I'm talking about, to select a right tyre and a crossover between them. You know, you want to have your soft compound here, your medium compound to overlap, then your hard one to overlap again. And again, we call them slightly different, but to keep it simple for most people to understand it, you'd always try and make sure you've got a decent crossover, because if there's such a narrow crossover here, if that's where the track temperature is and it's fluctuating because of conditions, you might be really good, then it's off, then it's on, then it's off. So you'd really try and make sure you've got a good selection of your tyres, that you'd have a good, decent crossover, so you'd have a relatively numb region where you had a good crossover. And that was part of the task in terms of tyre testing, testing across a range of track temperatures, so you'd make sure it would work properly.
Okay.
Obviously, you can do some small things once you've finally selected your tyres in terms of what you've got for the season. You could do small things on toe, on camber, roll stiffness a little bit as well, to try and work the tyre pressure. Obviously, you can do some certain things there.
Dampers at all? Like roll damping?
Personally, I've never found huge differences. I've tried it at various times to try and stiffen up dampers, to try and work the construction sidewall harder. But actually, it can compromise ride quality as well. So as soon as it starts to take away from another area, then you have to look at the overall package, and is that an overall net gain or reduction? So yes, in isolation, yes, you could warm up tyres more, but then if it starts to deteriorate another aspect, then maybe overall it's a net gain, it's a net loss. So
okay.
You need to look at it in the complete package as everything is. It's I'm trying to think of the right word now. It's the best compromiser in all.
Okay. So 2 questions then. You're talking about the overlap. So were you then working, first question is, how were you quantifying that? Was it just through lap time, through measuring temperatures, or through some other kind of physical measurement of the compound itself? And then the other question I had was, you guys must have been working quite closely with your tyre supplier then to get that real customization in.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I guess they need to change the blend of compounds in the.
Exactly. So if I answer your second question first, it's an iterative process.
Yeah.
You can't expect to turn up and find the right tyre straight away, because obviously we've done design changes to the car year on year, and that would then perhaps need something slightly different on the tyres. Again, maybe going to slightly different tracks as well. So Michelin, who had a good idea of, on their side, they were bringing new technologies. So new technologies in terms of compounds, new technologies in terms of constructions, how they're made, how it would try and give better feeling. But so it's always clear we want more grip, less degradation, tyres to last longer, go faster. But generally, you've got your circle, and if you improve grip, you start to affect degradation. If so everything starts to link to one another. So they're constantly trying to make this ellipse or oval bigger, of making all these components stronger. So they were bringing new technologies which we didn't really see in the finest detail, but they'd say, okay, this is a construction that's targeting X, Y, and Z. Okay, great. So then we would see the effect of that. And then it would be iterating from that, to say, okay, that was good, but when we put this and this together, that could be really interesting. Can we combine these 2 aspects? Okay, great. Then they go away.
Okay.
They try and look at iterating on that to bring the next bit. And actually, when you blend the 2 together, it doesn't work at all. Or that's great. So you can't always say, okay, it's going to work. Or and then equally with when you're testing compounds, you'd have generally a fixed construction, and you change compounds, boom, boom. And then you say, oh, actually, that compound was great. How about we mix it with the construction that we were testing with the other and then they'd blend bits together, and then it would be the next tyre test that we'd introduce that. So we had a very, very close link with Michelin, same as Porsche, Audi, Toyota as well. They would have all done something very similar there. It was just a one-tyre manufacturer, and we weren't limited to having one tyre to suit all three manufacturers. We could all bring our own tyres if we wanted. Occasionally we had different tyres, occasionally we had the same tyres, because we'd come to the same conclusion. Obviously, Michelin aren't going to go completely bespoke that for every single manufacturer. They're going to bring a similar selection that we could then choose between what suited our car better.
Okay. So I'm familiar with the effect of different compounds, but not so much with the different constructions, as you're saying. What effect, like physically, does a different construction have on how a tyre performs? Like, what part of its operation does that influence?
It can influence quite a bit. I mean, in terms of tyre warm-up, if you've got a lot of movement on the construction, that can encourage tyre warm-up. A lot of it's longevity as well, making sure that it's holding the structure quite well. Also in terms of how much camber it can support as well. They all behave slightly differently. So one might give slightly better longitudinal performance, one might give slightly better lateral performance. So it depends on which axle your car is more limited with in terms of either setup. You may require something slightly different. Depends where your weight distribution is. For example, if you're a very heavy rearwards weight distribution, you might want a bit more lateral support on your rear tyre to make sure that you have good entry speeds and that you can trail brake nice and late.
Got you. Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
It's very much a marriage of the two. You can't just look in one in isolation and say, okay, that's the great construction, because without the right compound to go with it, then it's going to be moving too much on the compound, and it'll feel like the tyre's overheating, and then it doesn't work out.
Okay. So then the last question I had on tyres, what was it? What kind of information are you getting from the tyres as you're racing? At that stage in LMP, was there tyre temperature sensors, pressures? I'm sure you had telemetry from.
Definitely.
Infrared cameras. I don't know what information were you getting to understand? Maybe not even during a race, but during practice. Where you were.
I mean, you could look at it in two ways. Certainly in practice, we were looking at different tyre compounds. So you test your medium versus your hard tyre. You check then what's working best at that track temperature in terms of degradation, in terms of overall performance. And if you look at Le Mans, the 24-hour race, you're changing compounds quite regularly throughout the race. I say regularly, I mean you're breaking your race up into the night period, into the hottest part of the day, because you can have big temperature swings, coming down 5-10 degrees sometimes if it's really, really chilly at night time, and it can be 30 plus whatever during the day, which is it's a big temperature range. So obviously you're looking at knowing the tyre temperatures where the tyres are working well from your testing, from your free practice sessions. You'd then be saying, okay, where are we at? You'd also be looking at your tyre degradation to say, okay, if the tyre degradation is starting to drop off because we believe the tyres are getting too hot, for example, you're coming out of the night, going back into the day, you'd be then trying to schedule your tyre change with the track temperature increase and making sure you're having the overlap, making sure you're getting your driver change, your tyre change all at the right time. You don't want to do an extra tyre change because you didn't schedule this in correctly. So, main things were temperature and pressure, for sure. Pressure is more as a result of how you're setting them up as well. But temperature is really an effect of how the driver's driving, not oversliding the tyre, but making sure he's putting enough energy into them, and also a real impact on, or a result of the track temperature.
Did you have, maybe this is getting a bit digging too deep, but did you have mass channels to understand your sliding energy over a lap back then? Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we had a Corvette on the car. So with the Corvette...
was that an optical sensor?
Yes, an optical sensor which sits underneath the car. And to keep it real simple, it's basically taking photos really quickly and then looking at the distance that you're travelling. And especially in a four-wheel drive car. So those are involved with this. Four-wheel drive car, out of the corners, essentially all four wheels are spinning. I mean, obviously you're not doing a rolling burnout, but in order to have traction, to have drive, they've all got to have a form of slip. So your wheel speed sensors are giving you wheel speed, not your vehicle speed.
Yeah.
And this would give the most accurate vehicle speed that you could have. And this would also give you your yaw, so you're sliding in a certain angle, as well as your longitudinal components.
Okay. Right. So from that you can calculate longitudinal velocity, lateral velocity.
Exactly.
And therefore your sliding energy.
Exactly.
Cool.
And that was very important, obviously. And obviously that will go into traction control systems as well. So your traction control systems for the front axle, for the rear axle. And that was all being used inside of that as well.
And where was that sensor located? Was that directly below the center of gravity?
No. So for us, it was not below the center of gravity, because that would mean putting a hole in the floor where the skid was. So for us, it was basically underneath the keel. So just at the front of the skid. So you've got the skid, which runs underneath the center line of the car. Mandated piece for pretty much all Formula.
Yep.
And then the bib is what you'd call the piece at the front of the skid that goes up into the monocoque, that kind of section there. So just in front of the skid, that's where we'd have it.
Okay.
And I assume it's very similar on Formula 1 cars as well. There's no floor around that area. Ideally it's around the centre of gravity, but physically there's a limitation there. I mean, it's a sensor as well. If you've got your chassis, you're not going to just bosh a hole in your chassis to have a sensor there. So obviously it's located high, it's a decent size, and
Okay. All right, so moving into Le Mans and
Yes.
Your experience of Le Mans. So we did touch on the preparation that you'd go through with Audi and Porsche leading up to it, but in the what was it like from a high level? What was your preparation schedule in the time leading up to that race? Like, what kind of testing would you do? Tire testing days, endurance, performance.
Yeah.
Like, how did that kind of build up work?
I think basically Le Mans starts as soon as Le Mans finishes. You're basically working on the next year almost straight away. Certainly the guys that aren't on the race team.
Yeah.
Guys on the race team are basically preparing for the second half of the season. But very soon after, I mean, we're involved in endurance testing for the next year's car. Putting team together, making sure you're having stability in terms of drivers. Engineering crews, you're already thinking about the year after. So it's a continual evolving process that never really stops. It's just organically moving from one season to the next. I mentioned already Aragon in November, December time. Certainly you're full swing by then. And that's continuing then into February, March time. Before the season starts, obviously, you have to make sure you're ready for the season, which was obviously starting maybe March, April time, and then Le Mans in June. So, in order to have a car ready for June, if you think about lead times, if you have problems with parts, you have to redesign bits, you have to have started your testing early enough.
Yeah.
And for us, that was as early as sometimes as September, October, November, and then leading forward. And that goes in terms of mechanical components on the car, whether it's a new engine, new hybrid system, new aero components, as well as then obviously tyre testing, which we mentioned already. There was no real off time. He was constantly going round and round.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that I like about Le Mans, and well, I guess not specific to Le Mans, but I guess it's the highest profile 24-hour race.
Yes.
But one of the aspects I really appreciate is the objective of managing a team of people over 24 hours, and there's so many people at a race such as Le Mans. So giving everyone everything they need to do their job as effectively as possible.
Yeah.
I find, teamwork is very important, and it's like, so I've had somewhat of an interest in the military recently.
Okay.
Not the war fighting aspect of it, because that's, I have no reason to do that, but just the training of, you've got a group of people, you have an objective, and in a similar sense, you throw, well, at certain levels of military anyway, you throw everything that group of people might need to complete their mission. And the difference, I guess, with a sport and the military is that the risk of not having a team organised, operating as smoothly as possible, is that, you know, people die. So there's no better environment to really focus teamwork, personal management, like keeping yourself cool and calm and considered under a lot of pressure. So I see a lot of parallels between motorsport and that, which I'm finding really interesting at the moment, specifically with special forces.
Yes.
It's quite unique training they have there. But what are your thoughts on how, you know, how best to, I guess as a race engineer, you have to manage people.
Yeah.
And above you would be technical director, chief engineer, or whatever. So what are your thoughts on how best to, or your experiences with managing people over a period like 24 hours at such a high level of competition and pressure?
I think a lot of what you touched on just then is very interesting. Certainly we looked at human performance.
Yeah.
We looked at making sure that we are able to perform over long periods of time, and touched on, you know, what you've mentioned just then is pretty spot on. Looked at those industries to understand how to extract good performance.
Okay.
And this is a lot of it psychological.
Yeah.
Part of it's nutrition.
Yep.
Part of it's exposure to light.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're on a good path there.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, because I didn't realise. Obviously, I didn't realise I was alone in this thought, but
No.
I didn't realise you were actively working to understand that better as a team.
Some of it's personal as well. Not everything's done on a team aspect, but certainly in terms of preparation, remaining cool under pressure, understanding to manage the things you can control. I think a lot of it's psychological as well, and that's where I really like this role. Some of it's really psychological in terms of managing your driver when they feel everything's not going their way. They're only looking at this bit. They have no clue that something else is happening that is 10 times worse than they're experiencing, but they just see what they're seeing. So it's up to you as a race engineer to be the cheerleader and control their emotions and encourage as well as the mechanics or everyone else. And I mean, you look back at Le Mans when we had so many issues with other cars, and you know, we came back, what year was it now? 2017, when we came from so far back, and it was basically being a cheerleader. We can do this, guys. We were so many laps down, and you know, never give up type of attitude. So a lot of what you have to do is, as a race engineer, is management across a wider range of technical aspects, as well as psychological, team management, morale, understanding how to talk to a very technical person, aerodynamicist, simulation engineer, equally a driver, and a mechanic, because you can't use the same language for all four roles. So a lot of it's explaining things in the correct way that someone can understand, because you can tell a mechanic to just do this, just get on with it, I'm telling you to do it. Sometimes actually, if you explain why, they'll tell you, oh yeah, okay, you've been telling me to do it this way, but actually now I understand why you're trying to do it. Actually, there's a better way again, which I didn't realise. So if you talk to people in a way that they can understand, and they understand the ulterior motive or goal, what you're trying to achieve, maybe you get better results.
Good leadership.
So,
okay.
But yeah, it's very interesting what you're mentioning there in terms of psychological, as well as preparation. And also communication is one thing. As a race engineer or as a team, a lot of what we do is on radio. And again, if you look at a lot of the protocols that are introduced, they came from the military. So certain words that you use, certain letters or numbers that you say, the way you say them, and making sure that you don't use words that can be mixed up with each other. So that comes again from radio protocol, that comes from the military. So a lot of what you're referencing there is relevant. Yes.
So was there any were teams like Audi and Porsche approaching militaries and saying, this is our problem, what did you do in this to achieve similar results?
No, I wouldn't say it was that level, but it was mainly just referring to information online.
Okay.
Maybe you contact specialist, but it wouldn't be, I think it's a more personal engineering level that we were doing it and then bring that information forwards. But maybe Formula One teams are doing it. Maybe they've got guys in house that have. I don't know, but they're not involved with the endurance aspect so much. Yeah. And for me, it was more about longevity of human performance over a wide range of conditions. How I can deal with lack of sleep. I love coffee, but I would always cut my coffee out for the whole of Le Mans. Yeah. And people say, okay, you should not do something different for your body, but for me, I found it worked really well of not having these spikes in caffeine. Yeah. And then the lows associated with it. So
that's exhausting in itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And equally, your body helps keep timing based upon meals as well. So for myself, I would never have a big meal. I'd be having lots of smaller meals, constantly grazing throughout the day. Again, not to have these big surges in energy. And if you've been to have a really big Sunday roast or something, and then afterwards you're just like, oh, I want to sleep. That's not going to help you on the pit wall, is it? Yeah. So understanding what type of foods to eat. I mean, these are very, very basic, simple ideas, but I think you understand the concept.
Yeah. Is there, how's the catering?
Amazing. Yeah. We were spoilt rotten. It were really, really good food.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were, very, very good. I can't complain in that respect at all.
Okay.
They had amazing hospitality units. The chefs were fantastic. Great food. We were looked after in that respect. They didn't scrimp on the budget there either.
Yeah, because you mentioned nutrition. That's important to me. Like, you saw me eat my box of fruit a bit earlier, but especially because I don't eat meat.
Okay.
So I understand. I've been involved in sports for most of my young adult life, I guess. So I appreciate the influence that eating for performance or eating for fuel rather than taste, I guess, is I understand the influence of that. You mentioned light.
Yes.
Again, another really interesting one. The influence light has on things like the hormones your body produces, melatonin, and just it can have a real like when you're jet lagged, for example, it's bright, it's daylight, but you're kind of you feel a certain way. Like, it's quite unique to jet lag. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well. Maybe you know what I mean. But
I know what you're trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do they manage light over the race in the pit boxes? Like aggressive, really blue light is probably quite exhausting. So
I think it's having a decent amount of light level. It's difficult because forcing your body to remain awake for a long period of time is not good for long periods of time, and we all know that.
Yeah.
But equally, you're trying to have your body in a high state of alert for a long period of time. A lot of it was naturally injections before pit stops. You'd always, that's when you'd have to be a bit more alert, making sure you don't run out of fuel, making sure you're called the right tyre set, making sure you're the right compounds going on, so you've got constant discussion, communication going on. So that naturally made things easier, but for myself, I always found a bit of a low kind of around 2-3 in the morning. That's when it's getting harder because it's been dark for a while. The pit lane goes quiet. There are fewer people around. There are less photographers, less action going on.
Yeah.
And then as the sun's starting to come up, kind of the 4 or 5, you're like, okay, right, we're nearly here. The night's over. Then you look at your watch. You're like, wow, still 11 hours to go. So then you realise, wow, there's still a long way.
Yeah.
But actually then things start to pick up. And as you say, the natural light, the sunrise, your brain starts to tick up. There's a bit more of a buzz in the pit lane as more and more people turn up.
Yeah.
Then the crowds start coming in. Then everyone's obviously more interested in the result, wet positions that people are in. But yeah, natural light has a big impact in your state of alertness. And you can't just flood yourself with too much light as well, because you need to have a bit of a downtime to recover. Even though you're not sleeping, you never sleep. You need to have a bit of a time to to cool off and then have another burst of energy, I'd say, towards the end of the race as well.
Yeah, right. Okay. And during the race, what kind of software are you using you were mentioned earlier, to make sure that you're not running out of fuel, and to track what is due to go on the car? I don't know if you ever had to change brakes and that kind of thing on those cars, but what were you using to help you on the pit wall to manage that?
So yeah, it really depends. There's lots of different pieces of software. Some of it's custom. Obviously, the most important things, obviously TV feeds, video feeds, what's going on, weather information. So whether it's your own weather station, whether it's radars supplied by Météo France or a weather supplier, that's bits of information. You'd have your telemetry, so real-time data running off the car. You'd have information on your tyres in terms of, I'd obviously have to know what I'm mounting, because you haven't got an infinite supply of rims. You need to know, okay, right, if it rains, I've got X number of wets. I've got X number of inters there in the oven ready to go in case, or maybe there's no rain forecast, we'll take them out, we'll put a bigger selection of slick tyres in the oven. And I want to make sure I'm covered. Okay, at night time, I need to have enough cold track temperature tyres. So I'd have a good overview of that. So maybe it's not so much data, but that's communication to the guys at the back. Timing information. So knowing the gaps to leaders, gaps to cars I'm directly racing, when they last stopped. Strategy information. What would I do if? And that was a constant process. What would I do if there's a safety car now? What would I do if it rained now? What would I do if we had a puncture now? Would I change driver, or would I just change that one tyre? Would I change all four? Would I? It really depends. So constantly going through what if, and then we had scenarios, talking to strategy guys. So yeah, in terms of visual data, what am I looking at? That's one aspect. But in terms of communication, these are my things I'm communicating with, and we obviously had intercom panels that you see on Formula One TV, and Formula One now. And I'd be talking to the strategy guys, talking to the guys on the tyres at the back. What other bits of information? I think that's quite a large range already there.
Yeah.
But it's piecing all those bits together to make sure you're making the right decisions at the right time.
Yeah, and what are you drawing from to make those decisions? Because you can obviously you can design a certain amount of procedures, but it's such a dynamic situation at a race like that. What are you drawing from to, like, for example, you said, okay, if I get a puncture, cars have got to come in and we change the tyres, but do we also want to change the driver?
Correct.
Is that based on your experience, or is that kind of more a formalised, we're this far into a stint, or we've got this long to the end, or our competitors are doing this, so what?
I think when in a puncture scenario, when you're talking about driver, you've got a minimum and maximum amount of driver time.
Right.
So minimum over the full race duration to get that driver qualified and to have points. And then a maximum time in terms of a stint duration, so the driver's only allowed to be in the car for a certain period of time. So if he was into his second stint and you were looking at triple stinting drivers, one, you think to yourself, he's been in for 2 already now. Could he do another 3? Physically, it's probably going to be quite hard. And additionally, you're going to exceed the 4 hours. So then you'll maybe incur another stop. So at this point, you'll think, okay, we're now past the point of no return. If we have a puncture at this point, we'd have to change driver.
Okay.
One aspect.
Got you.
Or that's the main aspect in terms of in that scenario.
Okay.
Because you want to do the fewest number of tyre changes possible, and if then your tyres and driver go out of sync, it never makes sense. You have to put your drivers in to be in sync with your tyre changes.
Yeah.
And you'd also have to make sure your next driver was available. So part of the reason with having decent duration, or making sure that tyres could last long enough, was to incentivize the rest time as well for a driver. Because if you consider that you essentially always have to have one driver in the car and one driver in the pits, being ready in case, or very soon after the previous one got out, if you look at then how long your rest time is not that long.
Yeah.
Because you're on standby for a long duration as well. Because, like I say, if you have a puncture in the start of stint 2, actually maybe then you'd need to have a driver ready to jump in. If you had it right at the beginning of stint 1, you left pit lane, there was an issue with a tyre, valve, or whatever you didn't see beforehand, which you should, but hypothetically, you'd probably put a new set of tyres and go again and just take that hit and keep that same driver in the car.
Yeah.
But if it's coming to the end of stint 2, certainly you have to be ready with the second driver to jump in. And equally, if it starts to rain, maybe then things are different. Because if it's starting to rain, maybe it's better for the same driver to stay in the car and say, right, actually now we'll put him onto winter tyres or wet tyres. He knows the conditions at least. So maybe we'll keep him in for another one to get through this transition period, because maybe that's harder than a new driver getting in not knowing what to expect. So it really depends. There's never one answer, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Just touching on human performance again. So as race engineer, you've got to manage the drivers, you've got to manage a pit crew. How are you keeping them motivated through the whole race? So kind of touched on how to keep yourself awake and alert and engaged. How do you usually help the rest of the team in that sense?
Certainly on the engineering side, you're trying to have constant dialogue, making sure guys are awake. Obviously with the live telemetry, there's plenty to look at, whether it's driver performance compared to the sister car, whether it's lap time, sector times compared to competitors, whether it's a corner that they're not particularly, or your current driver's losing performance at. You could then feed that information, and guys are constantly feeding that information to me to say, okay, I'd noticed a sector. Why are we down in sector 2? Where is the issue? How can we improve that one? Okay, that's one aspect. When it came to the mechanics, honestly, I left it more to the chief mechanic there to try and manage those guys. I can't physically manage everyone. It comes down to his responsibility to manage his guys. Equally, I would have one point of contact. So, yes, okay, in terms of communication, I'd always have to make sure the guys were ready. Again, what if this scenario, they'd know what would happen if, okay, that's now happened, right, put that action into plan. Be ready for this. We're going to do X, Y, Z next pit stop, but we have to be ready in case we come in and the driver doesn't feel well or whatever. We have to be ready then to go to backup. But in terms of communication, in terms of the actual mechanics and crew, for myself, I was more having one point of contact. It's not physically possible to keep an eye on everybody. Yeah,
sure. And so you're referencing data. Like, was there ever a point where it was like, wow, you're making way too many mistakes. We better get you in?
There have been times where a driver isn't performing. Certainly in the shorter races, when you could either go for 2 single stints, or you'd say, you'd go for a double, and actually the driver would say to you, you know what, I can't do the times that X, Y, and Z was doing before me. I don't want to put names down but I can't do those times, or
because of fatigue.
Not necessarily fatigue. I mean, just some drivers perform better at different tracks. Some drivers prefer a car in a certain balance, and if you've not hit the balance for him, but it's suiting the other driver better, if he's hit his minimum time in the car, he might say to you, joint decision. It's a team decision at the end of the day. They're an employee as much as I am, and if the result's going to come from putting somebody else in the car, there should be no hard feelings. I'm not here to make people happy, to massage egos. It's about getting the best performance for the team. And equally, some drivers would know that either in qualifying, you know what, mate, he's doing a better job than I am. Put him in with somebody else instead. Or, you do it on a rotation system potentially to begin with. But if you saw a big deficit in performance with one driver, it makes no sense just to do it just for the sake of it. So some of it would come from the drivers, and I was very lucky with the guys I work with, certainly with Porsche at the end, that if a driver wasn't feeling great, there'd be no ego to say, you know what, mate, put somebody else in. Or, I think we can do better. Or I am feeling good, mate. I want to be in. I feel good. I can nail this as well, So it's very much a team decision. I had very good relationship with my drivers. And it was very much a process that we all went through together and discussed a lot and made sure we extracted the best performance, because there's no point leaving something on the table because somebody else will just run away with it.
Yeah. Okay. So I was just looking at the time. I could stay on this for ages, but we can move forward. But just one last question before we move on, because I would love to talk a bit more about the cars.
Yes.
So with respect to working as a team, were there any like team building activities that you would all do before, like outside of a motorsport environment, just to get yourself familiar with everyone and, you know, break the ice and build those relationships?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. What kind of stuff would you do?
So we did, whether it was orienteering, problem solving, building a bridge.
So still kind of relevant.
Yeah. So it was outdoorsy, hands-on. Not every year. It just depended when things came up. Equally, it was just a barbecue sometimes as well.
Yeah.
And just to be with the guys outside of a work environment.
Yeah.
Team building in that respect is obviously good to meet and know people on a real personal level.
Mm-hmm.
See them when they're relaxed as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely did team building in some kind. I think you'll see that in anywhere, whether it's working in financial industry, whether it's working anywhere, you'll see that guys do workshops, and part of that is to enforce team building and good practice there as well. So we're no different.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. All right, so the Audi LMP1.
Yes.
The R18? Was it when you joined, or was it?
R15 plus, R18. Yeah, so there was a few different ones whilst I was there.
The R15 was the open cockpit one,
Correct.
Was it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. And then it moved into the diesels. Or was that? No, that was a diesel, wasn't it?
They were diesel the whole way through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So did you work on the hybrid? Because when the R18 came, there was the Ultra and the e-tron.
Correct.
Is that right? And the Ultra was pure internal combustion.
That's right.
Did you work on both?
I worked first on the Ultra, and then later I worked on the hybrid because there were only a few. So there was one year we brought 4 cars to Le Mans, and that year I was on a non-hybrid. We first raced those cars in Spa as 4 cars, trying to run it as one massive team, and it was tough. 4 cars. Yeah. So in the end, we tried to divide it up a little bit more, make it into a bit more manageable chunks, as it were. But yeah, we had the hybrids and non-hybrids. Yeah.
Okay. And there were identical cars, just the powertrain was different, right?
Yeah, identical for the fact that, essentially yes. Okay. Aero-wise, tyres-wise, everything else. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how was it working? How was it moving from internal combustion to having that extra element of hybrid power? Because then that opens a whole new area of performance, right? So you've got to understand regen, how much do you want to regen, where do you want to regen?
Exactly.
Then you've also got deployment, where, how much. So how was that working that into your processes?
It changed a lot, for sure. There's a lot more work to be done. We were limited on a lap basis, so it's not race based. So you'd have a certain amount of fuel energy you could use per lap, and then you had a certain amount of electrical energy you could deploy per lap as well. So yeah, you obviously need to recuperate it at efficient points, and then equally deploy it at efficient points as well. Generally, the lower the speed, the better. And all in one go, at the highest torque to get your best acceleration. It makes no sense using your electrical energy at the end of the straight just before you brake, for example.
Yeah.
So obviously we ran simulations knowing, we call it a profile, so knowing how much energy to deploy out of turn 1, turn 3, turn 9 and so on. You'd work out where you'd be deploying those. And that's what we were working on, obviously, throughout the simulations beforehand. And then when you're on track, then you'd say, look at the profile, see how it's doing, and then see if you can make it more efficient as well.
And that would be like you might create several maps for that kind of thing, depending on the circumstance. Yeah,
you could do, for sure. Yeah. You could look at how you deploy the energy in certain corners. Obviously, if you have a higher top speed into a long straight, it might not be the most efficient, but you'd be harder to overtake. or harder for somebody else to overtake you, I should say, because your speed's higher. They struggled.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you'd be looking at different ways of moving the energy around depending on the situation. Maybe you'd look at, I don't want to say too much, but I think for those that are in the industry that are doing this kind of thing, it's quite, I'd expect them to be doing something similar, but you're not always doing the same profile, because it could depend on track conditions as well. Because if you're grip limited, say for example, turn 2's grip limited is a high lateral component, and in the dry it's flat, you might then go a big boost out of turn 1 because you're flat through turn 2. Now, if it starts to rain and you're lifting through turn 2, or if you're going through that corner and you're grip limited, it doesn't make sense burning all your energy out of turn 1 now. You might want to instead delay the boost to after turn 2, so once you've got around that corner, and then use it. So obviously some of it's going to be strategically in terms of grip conditions, dry, wet. Some of it could be overtake, defend. It could be all sorts. And then it opens up a Pandora's box in terms of simulations, in terms of having, how are you going to even activate this on the steering wheel? How's the driver going to know what to do when? And so it becomes complicated.
Was there an element of GPS in that as well? So, altering the regen and deployment depending on where the car was on the track?
We wouldn't use GPS.
No.
We were using track position based upon other systems on the car. But essentially yes, depending on which corner, knowing the slower speed corners are more efficient to deploy energy out of, the higher speed corners doesn't. So you do smaller boosts out of those, for example, but that's just based upon lap time simulations and understanding, okay, you've got a packet of energy. How do I distribute this energy over the lap? If I put all of it in turn 1 and nothing the rest, okay, that might be a good sector 1, but the rest doesn't make sense. So then you just use your simulations to then redistribute, rebalance, and so on. I bet that's quite involved. That would be an interesting conversation to have by itself. Pre-race procedures. Yes.
I remember a conversation I had with Howden, and he was saying it was like you'd spend 5 minutes before the car even went out just setting all the systems up, and
So, I mean, certainly more than 5 minutes programming the car. And nowadays, it's not just a case of turning the ignition on and going. The system software side of things is very, very complicated. That's the same for Formula E, Formula 1, LMP. So you had different strategies. And then even then, once the driver got in the car, you're making sure all the rotaries are set correctly, making sure all the brake settings are set correctly, energy settings are set correctly. He understands what your program's going to be for the outing, for the session. So he's prepared in terms of what changes he needs to make. If you're doing, I don't know, a sweep on energy profile, a sweep on brake settings to see, okay, how does that affect entry balance? Do you need to... So you're definitely setting a lot of different settings before the driver even leaves. It's not just a case of turn the ignition on and roll out. So
do you prefer the simplicity of the non-hybrids? I mean, it can make things interesting having the hybrid there, I guess, but does it take away? Does it force you to dive into things that aren't so interesting and take away from the just being present and racing? That
I say doesn't really bother me so much. You certainly have a lot more tools to play with the hybrid systems. So the LMP1 car we had at the time, there was recuperation on the front axle. That was going via differential. And obviously with that happening, if you change the amount of torque going into the differential, would change how much locking you had. And these cars were phenomenal. The amount of braking potential that they had, because the diff was locked, you could trail it into the corners so heavy. It was really impressive. I mean, I remember when we were testing at Abu Dhabi, going up to certain corners, just standing trackside as the car came in, and you're blown away as the potential these cars had. And obviously the more locks you have, the more understeer you have as well. So then you'd have to find the right balance of opening the diff at the right time to make sure the car turned in, but then you're losing energy. So you've got this whole balance point. And I like the challenge then of finding that right balance in terms of overall package. So
sounds like a headache.
It is a headache. But that's why you've got the performance engineers, you've got the simulation engineers to understand the impact on energy versus lap time, and then work out the potential in terms of the balance of how that's changing the car across conditions as well. So it's a big subject. It's a big subject.
Yeah, I remember you saying in a conversation we had before as well. The aero platforms are sensitive to like 0.5 millimeter.
Yeah.
Of change. That's that's a really interesting. That's very sensitive.
Yeah, they were. I mean, they were very sensitive cars. Ideally, you don't want a car that's that sensitive. You want a car that works well over a range of conditions. However, we did experience, aero performance drop off with a front splitter, for example, with dirt, debris, stone chips on them.
So measurable in data or by the driver?
Both.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah. So you'd be benchmarking components. You'd know that after a certain amount of time you have to make sure it's cleaned.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're measuring all these things.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then, with a platform that's sensitive, do you then rely on a lot of anti-dive geometry to keep yourself really, to stop diving, under braking, squatting?
It depends. I mean, it's very hard to say. It's just one aspect.
Yeah.
It depends on your car. I mentioned earlier on, for example, weight distribution. It depends on to what your problems you're trying to fix. So if you've always got a certain balance in the car, yes, some antis can help you, but that will bring some negatives as well. It doesn't always just fix. Oh yeah, it's got more anti. It's definitely better.
Yeah.
To say it depends. If you've got washout understeer every single exits, you might want to have some anti-squat. Okay, to try and keep the front down to try and get out, but then your traction is going to be compromised.
Yeah.
So it's always a balance point between. And it depends what your problem is. Yeah. And you're going to move it somewhere else. There's not going to be one silver bullet that then fixes everything. So, but we ended up introducing systems. For example, the link system front to rear. I think that was documented
with Porsche.
Yeah,
I'd
towards
like to
the end.
into that a little bit.
Yeah. So there's a link system working on the third dampers. And that was basically pushing fluid front to rear. So essentially, as opposed to your traditional ride height profile being front coming down, rear coming down, you'd basically try and have the front static and it just pivoting, because you're basically pushing fluid from the rear damper to the front damper to hold the front up as opposed to it coming down. So, but that's basically a seesaw. Yeah. And if you get that wrong, you get your motion ratios wrong, you get your piston diameters wrong.
Yeah.
You get the damping wrong as well, then you can get porpoising, you can get all sorts, and you don't get the pump up enough, or you get too much pump up, then it just does this.
Yeah.
So having that balance point was very, very tricky.
Yeah. Was that adjustable? Like, could you adjust that front? Was it frick they called it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It depends how you call it. You call it a pitch link system or front rear interconnect system, or similar system, different names.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got an RS4, a B7.
Oh yeah, nice.
Which had it had that. I think they called it DRC.
Okay.
And I quite liked it. The problem with that was it leaked all the time. It happened to me. It happened to me twice, and then I got to a point where I was just got it out and put some traditional dampers in. But I did notice I guess the effect was the same on dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Braking and acceleration and even roll as well.
Okay.
It kind of just firmed up that initial damping response.
So for us, it was purely aero based. Certainly aero based, and it was front to rear. It wasn't cross, so there was no roll component to it.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on how link systems they have, but for us, it was purely being driven by aero and performance, and most of the aero performance from a highly aero-sensitive car comes from the front. So you keep the front as low and stiff as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you didn't have a link system and you have the front super stiff, it's just going to bounce off all the curbs, and it's not going to have any compliance in it. So you're finding that right balance there.
Was there, in the development of that system, was there any times where in a particular configuration it was just way off?
Yes.
Yeah.
I won't tell you anymore, but yes, it was not easy to get right. It took some time.
Yeah.
It was not easy to. It wasn't a solution we took out of the box. We fitted and it was working. No, unfortunately, it wasn't that way. It needed a lot of honing, tuning.
Yeah.
yeah, as you say there, and then you look at specific tracks like Eau Rouge and Spa, where it has another component of being smashed into the ground, and it was a challenge, definitely.
Okay, cool. All right, so moving into the Porsche times, how was it moving? Just briefly, how was it moving from Audi to Porsche?
Just to be clear, those systems there, those actually at Porsche.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was very lucky to be. So I ran Timo Bernhard, who later went on to the Porsche program, and with Timo, we got on really well, and he actually introduced me to Porsche when they were looking for a race engineer, and I was basically asked to join the team, of which I'm hugely grateful for, because I'm still there now. So I joined the team in 2015. Start of 15 I joined them, and that was to look after Mark Webber, Timo Bernhard, and El Bamba. Brendan Hartley. El Bamba joined later on. And we had 2 great seasons. Won the championship, didn't win Le Mans, and things were great. And then finally, the last year, once they announced that they were pulling out, that's when we won Le Mans in 17, and they won championship there again. But it was a bit of a transition. Things were different. Things weren't as so-called sorted when I first joined. The team was still growing. They had a very tough year in 2014 as their first year in the championship. Andreas Seidel was kind of operations side, who's now at McLaren. Obviously, very, very big figure. Did amazing things for the team, and it was a fantastic group of guys. And for me, the biggest transition, I'd say, or biggest difference I noticed was that as opposed to having the Yoast and the Audi Sport, it was all in-house. Mechanics, engineers, everyone was under one roof. And that for me was very, very powerful.
Positive.
Very positive. And also I think at the time the software that Porsche were doing was outstanding. I think obviously Audi developed from there, but I was involved with a lot more of it, with being in-house, being in Stuttgart in Weissach, a lot more than I had been involved when I was at Audi. I was a lot more connected to what the guys were doing on writing the software, and that was very impressive for myself.
Just like flow of information.
It was very much a closer knit unit. And if I wanted to have an impact on XYZ, I'd go and sit down with the guys straight away, and I'd discuss, understand how we could improve it, discuss it with the other race engineers, and then we'd try and push something into the car. And that process was, for me, slightly longer at Audi Sport. We weren't that connected. And that's the gain, obviously, when you have everything in-house, like an F1 team is. Yeah,
sure. So in terms of the cars, 2 different groups of people or organizations, they're trying to do the same thing ultimately. Were the cars very different between each other?
So when I left Audi, it was a smaller category of hybrid. So things were slightly different there. For us in Porsche, the hybrid system category was a top category. And whilst in some ways it doesn't change a huge amount, it makes small differences, and I think we had an advantage from the hybrid powertrain. It was certainly very, very good at Porsche at the time. Audi closed the gap towards the latter parts of the championship before we pulled out, or before everything kind of stopped, as it was back then. But the advantage we had on the hybrid power system powertrain side, I think, was quite strong.
Was it the flywheel systems that they were using?
On the Audi it was. We had batteries in the Porsche. Obviously recovery coming from the front axle, electromotor on the front axle, as well as exhaust recovery as well from the engine.
Oh really?
So you had dual, that's obviously from Le Mans. Big straights, you'd be kind of trickle charging, if you want to call it that, simplistic terms. Trickle charging, and then under the braking you'd be like much higher power charging.
All right then. So, I just wanted to touch on the Evo, the 919 Evo.
Oh yes.
I think we did speak about this briefly before, but that's like that just seems like a really cool project. Like, we've got no regs, let's just have some fun.
I think that's what they did. I personally wasn't involved with that project. I was watching from afar. I was already starting the Formula E project at the time. But obviously I was following closely, and all the guys involved are the same guys that we worked on the LMP1 car.
Yeah.
They're still with us now.
Yeah.
It's insane. What the guys did was cool. It was really cool. So
Yeah.
drag reductions, I don't know every single technical aspect, but drag reduction front and rear, special tyres, special engine, special hybrid system, special aero. I mean, the car it's a monster.
Yeah.
It really was. And it was almost at the point where it was almost at the point of physical what a driver's capable of doing at some points.
Really?
The car was that quick. So, you almost have to turn your brain off and say, yes, it's going to do it.
Yeah,
so,
okay, right. Okay.
The acceleration was brutal.
Yeah.
Cornering speeds were very high. I mean, what the lap that Timo did at the Nürburgring, I mean, come on. It's insane. It really is. If you've watched that on board, it's scary, yeah.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I think you mentioned as well, like you were struggling to find tyres that would really last more than a couple laps.
Yep. Basically, tyres are doing one lap, that was it.
Yeah. And is that because you just take so much material off them, or they were getting too hot?
I don't want to say the wrong thing because I wasn't there at the track. All I just know is that you basically hit a lap, you do one, and then next set. So in terms of any more than that, I'm not so sure. But it was making sure that they were at the right temperature to start the lap, and then they were starting to drop off towards the end. And hitting that sweet spot to make it last long enough, but also be ready at the beginning is tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it's a cool project, really cool project.
Yeah, I wish more of them existed. I understand why they don't, because it's
expensive.
Exactly. Yeah. Ultimately, but things like that. I always feel. I mean, in my career, I'm still quite young, but I always feel almost a bit of a shame that I've missed projects like that because, I was too young or whatever. And will projects like that ever come around again?
I think it becomes harder and harder. If you look at the way that cars are being built now, there's more one make series, one make championships, or spec parts, or even in the top category now at Le Mans. With these categories, a lot of it's spec parts as well. That's certainly the way it's going. Cost caps, cost driven. So it's very much different even from when I first started out, and that's not even that long ago. Yeah,
motorsport's in a bit of a funny state at the moment, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So we talked about Formula E a bit earlier. So I think that kind of covered most of my questions around there.
Okay.
How do you, as an environment to race in, what do you prefer? The endurance LMP kind of stuff, or the more sprint Formula E, pure, I guess, energy management, tyre management kind of?
If I almost can't choose between the two because they're so different. I do like the one-day format of Formula E, the making sure you'll hit the track running, you've done your homework, you've done your work on the sim, you've done your simulations, you know what to expect, you know how track conditions are going to change and what the effect is going to be, you've got your energy profile sorted, and if you're not, you're going to get slaughtered. So I like that aspect of things. I like that you've got to do your homework. The thing I don't like is that even though you've done all of that, it doesn't guarantee anything. Okay, nothing guarantees anything, but the racing is so close that some guys take bigger risks than they should. Some guys try and fight above the weight category that they should be fighting in, and they take you out. It's been countless times where you've been in a good position and you've been crashed into, or someone's taken a chance at a move that they shouldn't have done, and that aspect I don't like, I've got to say. But in terms of the engineering challenge, I do like Formula E. It is pushing you to be better sorted, better prepared, nail down the details into as fine a level as you can. Think of every scenario up front, so it's very, very different. Endurance racing, if you have an error, a mistake, you can come back from it. Formula E, there's no chance. If you don't hit the ground running in free practice one, maybe you'd recover, but everyone's moving forward. And if you have a deficit to start with,
you get left behind.
You've got to overcome that and then more to be at the front again, which is possible. For sure it's possible, but it's harder.
Yeah, no.
LMP times or traditional kind of free practice 1-2 on the Friday, you're qualifying on the Saturday, you're racing on the Sunday, 3-day format, you've got far more time to get things sorted.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have things quite there, you can recover from it, which I like as well. So you can't really compare. And I do miss the endurance aspect of, it's not over till a fat lady sings. You fight all the way to the end. You never give up. I like that aspect as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very different, very, very different. And I do miss the big aspect of endurance racing on a high level.
Yeah.
But equally, I'm still enjoying Formula E in terms of the challenge it presents. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just a different challenge and engineering in some respects. So I'm enjoying both, or I did enjoy both and continue to do so.
Okay, cool. All right, so moving into kind of the end, well, closing out the not, I was going to say interviews, not quite, the conversation.
Chat,
yeah. Just wanted to talk about career highlights.
Okay.
Like, what's the feeling of winning your first Le Mans after so much energy and effort and build up? And
it's strange. Yeah, won the first Le Mans in 2013.
Yeah.
And obviously been with Audi for a few years by that point.
Mm-hmm.
The team had won several times, and it wasn't my car, the car I was working on.
Yeah.
It was obviously the team had won, but you want it to be yours, whether it's a driver, whether it's a mechanic, an engineer that's working on one car.
Yeah.
Obviously you've got huge amounts of resources back home.
Mm-hmm.
That, not to say I don't care which car wins, but if the team wins, then that's the biggest goal for sure.
Yeah.
But obviously you take massive pride in it being your car.
Yeah.
And a lot of it can be right place, right time.
Yeah.
Some of it can be on strategy, some of it can be on the right calls, right setup. Right strategy in terms of full course yellow, safety cars, making sure you make the right calls there, you're not losing time. So that was a big one for myself, and winning it with those guys was great as well. So that was Alan McNish, Tom Christensen, Loic Duval. 2013 was a big year for myself, so that was special. And then it wasn't until 2017 that I won again with Porsche, and really proud to have won Le Mans both with Audi as well as Porsche. And I don't know, I seem to make the transition from Audi to Porsche at the right time. I was with the winning manufacturer every single year I was at Le Mans. So right place and right time, you can say as well. So very, very pleased to have made those changes when I did. And
there's that picture I think you sent me before of where you're sitting on the Porsche, I guess, as you're going through the winners parade or whatever you want to call it. That's got to be a legendary picture.
Yeah.
I if it was me, I would have had that like a big format up on my wall.
I've got that on the frame in my office. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That was good. It was good moments.
Yeah.
I was sent up on the podium, and it's not very often a race engineer gets to be sent up there, and it's normally the team principal, team manager, or somebody. So that was 2017, and to be up there was very, very special.
I do think race engineers should get more recognition for their contribution to a successful race, but that's another story. Okay, outside of work, what are your interests outside of motorsport? What do you do for fun? Hobbies? Yeah,
so family's one of the biggest things.
Mm-hmm.
Got 2 boys, 7-year-old, 4-year-old.
Oh, wow.
Full of energy.
A
lot of energy.
So
responsible, trying to burn that up a little bit. So obviously family's massively important. Miss them massively when you go travelling for long periods of time. Spend a lot of time with them, whether it's direct family. Obviously my parents live nearby. My wife's parents live nearby. Brother-in-law, so I spend a lot of time with those guys. And if it's not with that, then my social circle, my friends are all petrol heads, massive petrol heads. They've all got sports cars, supercars of some kind. And whether it's just going for a drive on Sunday morning, whether it's going to a car event, doing a track day, that's my passion as well. And I enjoy driving. I'd love to have done more competitive driving if I could have had the pockets for it. I'd still love to have done it. Maybe if you earn the money later on, you can do it. But anything behind a wheel, I love being behind a wheel as well. So drive really early, 4 or 5 a.m. Sunday morning. We'll go and do the country lanes. While it's quiet. So
yeah, cool. Have you ever? You said you've done some track days.
Yes.
I've not so much recently, but I've done a few.
Mm-hmm.
Have you done the ring?
No, not done Nürburgring. I've been there as a passenger.
Yeah.
I didn't have a car at the time,
Okay.
but I've travelled out there a couple of times with guys on road trips, just as a passenger. So not driven the ring competitively. I would love to, having done Nürburgring 24.
Yeah.
I did Nürburgring 24 a few years ago, and there was an onboard camera, and wow, I think I know the track pretty well now.
Yeah.
Even though I haven't done so many apps driving it. But yeah, I think taking your own car there until you're fully up to speed, I'd probably just rent something and do a few laps and go from there.
It's very intimidating.
Yes.
I've done it a couple of times. And it's like you're learning the track. I've only done the tourist days, right? So it's such a mix.
Oh, it's crazy.
So like you're learning the track, and you've got guys in supercars that have done thousands of laps that are like literally lapping minutes faster than you.
Yeah.
You've got motorbikes to deal with as well.
Yes.
And on top of that, in the back of your mind, it's like, if I crash, I've got to pay for my car, I've got to pay for the barrier, I've got to get the car home. So it's like you
leave something on the table. There's no way you can go flat chat. Yeah. Like you say, speed profile of the speed, the motorbikes is completely different. And there's a Mark 1 Golf who's just tanking faster than you as well. These guys are crazy. So
I was struggling to keep up with it was like a Clio, was it the Williams one with the gold wheels?
Oh, nice. Yeah, cool.
But I couldn't even keep up with that. It was
if a guy knows what they're doing and they're looked after cars, they're track prepared.
Yeah.
They can be quick. Yeah, definitely.
No, for sure. Okay. All right, Q&A. Let's get through a few Q&As quickly.
Oh, yeah, okay, cool.
I think some of them we've gone over in our talk. Okay, someone asked, are there times where you conflict with the driver on setup? So, for example, the driver wants a certain thing, but from a performance point of view, that's not gonna give you the best. So, how do you manage those situations?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that situation a lot. It's day to day. It depends when that conflict happens. Is it on the simulator? It's easy. You do a test.
Yeah.
Is it just before the race? You can take a chance.
Yeah.
It's just before qualifying. Which way you're going to go. So yes, you definitely get these conflicts or disagreements or different in philosophy. Depending when it is, it makes it easier or harder to find the solution. Like I say, if you're on the sim, you do a little setup block, or you'd find a way of convincing, testing what's better.
Yeah.
But part of it, as well as a race engineer, is understanding the psychological aspect. So if a driver is telling you something is better, you have to find a very good way of testing it as well, because even though you're convincing him, trying to convince him, every human believes they're right.
Yeah.
So it's how you sell it as well.
Yeah.
And how you present the solution and why you believe it's better. So that's not a straightforward answer. I can't give you an answer.
No.
It really depends on the situation as well.
Yeah.
And how much risk there is. Because if there's a lot of risk going into qualifying and you have to make a massive change, or is it just a small thing, or is it, it's a tough question to answer, because it's really dependent on so many different aspects.
Yep. Okay. Where do you find the most lap time around the track? Slow corners, fast corners, mid-speed corners? If you're trying to optimize the performance of a car, where is most of your focus?
I would generally focus on corners out of a slow speed with a long straight. So the reason I say that is if you look at a 2 kilometre, or let's say 5 kilometre gain from 50 kilometres an hour, it's a 10% increase in speed. If you look at a 5 kilometre increase from 100 k's, it's a much smaller percentage. Furthermore, if you've got a long straight afterwards, you're going to carry that benefit from a higher exit speed all the way down the straight. So only you're going to get a gain from the mid-corner speed, and then furthermore down the straight. So generally you focus on lower speeds with long straights afterwards. if those are perfect and you're not going to compromise those, then obviously you work on other areas as well. You don't just go, oh yeah, my job's done.
Yeah.
But generally, it's much harder to make huge lap time gains in really high-speed corners. Obviously, there are differences to that. For example, if you look at Le Mans, the Porsche curves, you've got a track where you want really low drag, low downforce for the main straights, but then you want to have a decent amount of decent amount of downforce for the Porsche curves. So there's a bit of a compromise there, but that's quite an extreme example.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And the last one, wildest moments.
Wildest moments.
Yeah. Like me personally, I like. It sounds a bit. I don't know what the word to say is, but when things fail, I like. Failures can be spectacular sometimes.
Yes.
And that alone is quite exciting.
Yes.
Because not only then do you want to understand why, but just physically seeing something that's destroyed itself is like. I find it. I can't think of the word.
I know what you mean. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you understand the power of the forces going through something.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, do you have any moments where not necessarily a failure, but just something where you're just like, wow?
I think one of the biggest moments is Le Mans 2017.
Yeah.
Because we were so far back, things really weren't in our favour. We were pushing the whole way through the night, and to come back and to not have given up, we had to change components on the car. We were laps down. And I know other cars had retired to put us into that position, and we were racing a car that wasn't in our category, but regardless, that was a big push. And there, every minute, every second made a difference in the pits.
Yeah.
The guys changing the components as fast as possible, us coming back when you don't think it's possible. Yeah, never give up.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, just never give up. Head down, get the job done. Anything can happen. And yeah, that's one of my biggest moments, I'd say, and it's a big race as well. To have come away with the win there is good. Okay.
And the last, that kind of leads neatly into the last segment, I guess, which is valued lessons and advice. Like, for example, learning or dealing with situations where things haven't been going in your favour, and you've just got to stay in it and keep your spirits high, keep working methodically towards a solution. Also the importance of mentorship and things like that. What would you say about those?
I think it's a lot of it surrounding yourself with people you can look up to. Making sure you've got good influences in where you are. If you get very stagnated and you're not content where you are, whether it's in your job or personal life, no one's going to do it for you. You have to make a physical change yourself and look for the next challenge. Yeah, it's not really motorsport related. It's just any job anywhere, isn't it? If you're not happy, do something about it, which is always easier said than done. It can be very uncomfortable. Whether it's uncomfortable going to the unknown in terms of not knowing what to expect, if you want to change industry, whether it's worry about the financial aspect of things, because obviously that can be if you're having to leave your job and going to something else, you're going to be able to bridge that gap. But if you're not happy about something, no one's going to do it for you. I think that's true for many, many people. And
indeed,
it's a very easy thing to say when we're here in a nice, comfy environment to say, don't be content. Always look for better. But look at yourself, and I think I've been through that, and it sounds like you have as well yourself. So, and it's very hard to make a change, but sometimes you need to do that.
Okay, cool. Wow, we've reached an end. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think, I said I booked 2 hours. I think we've gone a bit over. Whatever, I didn't want to cut it
No, I've really
short.
enjoyed it. It's going great.
Yeah, cool. I think we've got a lot of good information for, not only aspiring race engineers, current race engineers, enthusiasts, people who love the sport. I think there's a lot that will connect with people there.
Hope so.
So thank you. Just to close then, do you want to plug anything you're working on, any social media or any shout outs?
I don't really plug anything. There's nothing I'm really working on that I'm driving right now. I'm very happy working with Porsche at the moment. If you're not already following us, then you can do so. Follow Porsche Formula E. We're traveling a lot at the moment. We've just come back from Jakarta, and next stop is Marrakesh. So yeah, check us out.
Cool. All right then. So we're Wavy Dynamics, written on my shirt, and as you'll see from the podcast. So follow us. And I hate saying follow us. That's quite tacky, but yeah, there's going to be more of these either way. I want to not super regularly, but just, you know, when the opportunity's there, once a month, once every couple of months or something like that, I'd like to get one of these in. So expect more to come. Hope you've enjoyed it. Wavy Dynamics is an automotive and motorsport engineering consultancy specializing in vehicle dynamics and aerodynamics. We bridge the gap between a deep understanding of technology and clear performance outcomes. If you want to engage with us with any of your projects, we would love to hear from you. Be inspired.